and see the town hall. I think they love coming in. You see the welcome center, and it is exactly that. It is a welcome center. So that's been a consideration. Do we want to come in and see a building regardless of how beautiful it is? That's a consideration. And if the other ideas float through, I'll be back.
I went down and first of all, thanks to the ad hoc committee for all their work putting those things together. It was helpful in bringing to light things I hadn't thought about. I also took the opportunity to go down and spend a considerable amount of time with the physical comment cards themselves. That's just the way my mind works. I like to see primary data, and they're all available there. But the card that struck me too about the first 3 sites were the visible impact of that being what you see when you come into town above the gate and at Pratt Park and at the post office site. And I had never thought about it in that context of, yes, it's off the beaten path, but if you want the lot that has the least effect on what Montreat looks like today, it's the Florida Terrace site. That may be important to you or not, but if you want the Montreat to stay the same as you know it, the Florida Terrace site will keep it a place where you can come to do the business that you need to do at the town of Montreat and a place for your staff to be. Through this process that we've had since June, there have been a number of changes that have occurred through conversations with citizens and with the architects and the commissioners, and they've been for the better. And I am the first to admit that I wish we had never considered the 3-story concept, which would have had an impact on Arkansas. That was changed after the very first meeting. Basically, if it had stayed the 3-story concept, there would have been a police presence on Arkansas, and you would have had traffic on Arkansas, and the quiet residential area that is Arkansas would have been impacted. But with the 2-story concept that's currently being considered, I think those of you who have been to the meeting and spent some time on the website can see that basically you're not impacting anybody on Arkansas. The profile is less than Sylvan Heights, and have basically the number of trees that will need to be removed will be quite few in regard to any building that goes on up there. It is platted such that you can put 3 houses up there. It's under the old platting system. A couple of things in terms of location, it's the point of view. When you start thinking in terms of, again, what is the center of Montreat, not what's the easiest to get to as you take your trash to the dumpster, sort of thing. What is the center of Montreat? And first of all, I appreciate all of MRA's stance on this whole Montreat controversy that we're having, of being supportive of the commission of things. But I would like to use a map that they have put out from the conference center. They have the map of Montreat that we're used to, and they have an inset identified of the conference center. That's the Montreat Conference Center. It includes all of the major institutions' administrative offices. There's Gaither Chapel, Gaither Hall, where the administrative offices of the college are. That's also where Christ Community Church is in that area. Freeland Hall is within that area. The new Presbyterian Church USA administrative offices will be within that area, and within that same center spot with all the administrative offices of the 3 institutions within Montreat, there is the Florida Terrace site is included within that structure. So I think that needs to be considered as we talk about worst location, and then there's the difference of the site that it is. A couple of other issues. The traffic concerns have been addressed, and I got a report from Montreat College on the number of cars that they have on campus, because the increased traffic that would be generated by the town hall being in that site was a concern from others. And I think at one point in time, prior to June, when there have been a lot more discussions, that the town staff indicated that maybe 10 or 15 people a day came to the town office on a regular basis. I think one of the members of the public yesterday meeting commented he rarely needed to go to the town office. And even as serving as a commissioner, I find that many of my questions are answered with simple phone calls. I generally stop by because I just enjoy the people that are there, but most of my questions can be answered very quickly. In terms of adding to the traffic count that's up there, most of the building that's occurring in Montreat at this point in time, as people go in for contractors and permits, is really occurring above the lake at this point in time, because quite frankly, below the lake is pretty well built out. So they're going to be going into that area anyway. For the college students, there was some suggestion in the paper worried about the college student and affecting traffic, of being detrimental to the college. But basically at this point in time, there are 385 vehicle permits on the college campus. So I don't think that the addition of the town hall traffic would have a significant impact on that. Also going to the Montreat Conference Center website itself, in talking about what is the central area of Montreat, and it's a lovely thing, and I agree, and this is a direct quote of the conference center, and whether institutional buildings should be within residential areas. As Commissioner McCaskill said, this is properly zoned and has been for decades. It's institutional, residential. With respect to the lodges and accommodations that are available on the Montreat Conference website, quoting that, our 10 guest lodges, including the Winnsboro Inn, are scattered among the private residences in the Montreat community and are all within minutes of Lake Susan, a favorite choice for church groups and family retreats. They can accommodate anywhere from 8 to 61 guests. That's who we are as a community. Our administrative offices are embedded within residential transitional areas. This is not plopping something down that's not been appropriated for years. Another issue that I've heard talked about is, again, the repurchase perhaps of the property and restoring it to the tax rolls has been promoted as a central reason for not building on Florida Terrace. And just giving you the numbers for that, these particular pieces of property were first acquired by Dr. and Mrs. Anderson when they came to Montreat. They were transferred basically to the college in '63 when Mrs. Anderson passed away. At that point in time, they went off the tax rolls. There was no town at that point in time. So basically, only have been on the tax rolls for 2 years. 2012 and 2013 are the only 2 years. So just to address that argument of returning them to the tax rolls. And the tax for 2012 that came to the town of Montreat was $359. And in 2013, the taxes that came to Montreat, the town of Montreat, were $469. So I just wanted to highlight that as information for everyone on that. If the taxes were to go up, it would be because they were developed and houses built. And I think if there were 2 houses or certainly 3 houses there, there would be much more of the property stripped and trees cut and changing the character of those three sites than if the current design for the 2-story building was built there. So those are some pieces of information. Martha?
Yeah, one of the things I've thought about in relation to this property, and as we've walked there and I've driven by it, is that the property on Florida Terrace is in community with the college and the conference center. it was mentioned last night, and it's been mentioned several times before, but one of the things about being across the street from the college president's home and next door to a conference center lodge is that the town hall could be an anchor. We know the college has kind of needed an anchor in recent years, but I think it's important that we look at it as a possibility of being an anchor. That's different than the look of the town hall if it were at Pratt Park or by the post office, for example, where it's there among other buildings, but it's not kind of anchored with our neighbors in the other institutions. Sylvan Heights was not a quiet residential building when I lived there as a college student. It doesn't have air conditioning, so there's not a lot of quiet there in the summers, I'm sure. But basically, it's not occupied a good part of the year, so that is a very quiet place. And I think our town hall, even as an anchor there, or even in community, would basically be for daytime use with occasional evening meetings or availability for community events and gatherings if they weren't too big, because we're talking about a fairly small meeting room there. But I like the idea of really being in community with the other organizations in the town. It also makes possible the sharing of space, whether it's parking space or other kinds of spaces that might be needed either by the town, if you need more parking, or by the conference center or the college for events that might be taking place during certain hours wherever they are.
It's curious that when we're talking about the property near the post office, we mentioned lodges and children disengorging themselves by the lodge and coming by what might have been a town hall on that piece of property. But on Florida Terrace, where we've got lodges, no one mentions the kids coming out of those lodges, going by town hall and having to go down the hill. So, you know, that's, and then we get to the part where they wouldn't allow us to put asphalt on their property. I wouldn't allow you to put asphalt on my property, but if I owned it, then I could build on it. And that's talking about the post office again. It's just illogical to me.
I think to answer that question, the two lodges that are used on Florida Terrace, most of those kids have cars, and they are the summer staff. They are not conferees that are staying in Reynolds and in Hickory Lodge.
Then we've got to watch out for cars.
And we've already begun conversations with the conference center to address some of the issues of the number of cars, because over the period of years, that area has either been the quietest of all residential areas in Montreat or the busiest area in Montreat. So, you know, different perspectives. But I've already begun conversations with Ms. Gilliland that perhaps that some things can be done during the summer months, in particular with the summer staff, most of who have cars up there. They are not walking so much. They are summer staff, not conferees up there. And in terms of placing that near the college kids, the issues, one of the most interesting times I've had since I've been in Montreat was the attending the inauguration of President Maurer. It was a wonderful time, and I think we need to work as a town, as a conference center, and a college. We all are better together than any of us are apart. And I am moving towards the Florida Terrace site. I attended the academic forum that was part of that particular weekend series, and there was discussion about the value of liberal educations and combining that with internships. I think any building that the town has that brings focus to the college in that area would be an asset to the college. I also think it would be a wonderful opportunity for the town, once it has space nearby in the college, to provide internships for the college students. That could happen in any space that we eventually build, I understand that, but it certainly does bring people into the college community in a way that they don't right now. Certainly in terms of they come to the conference center, they come to the Montreat Presbyterian Church, We certainly have Christ Community Church up there as well. It is not a bad site. It doesn't have the visual prominence of any of the other three, but it is off the beaten track, and that's not a bad thing, and it will bring people into that part of town. And that's where the building is going, above the lake now. It's not happening below the lake anymore.
Well, I was going to talk to Commissioner Helms over there, because most of the people that talked to me during this time frame have all in favor of Florida Terrace, by far from the ones that...
You'll have to say that again, they couldn't hear you.
Is it not on? No. I didn't turn anything on.
Do you have a battery die?
It'll be there. I've said everybody that I've had direct contact with has been in favor of Florida Terrace. I've heard other people, but the majority of the people that spoke to me in person were in favor of Florida Terrace and to keep rolling. So that's where I'm headed.
I can see that, Jack, and
Yeah, I know you can.
and it's frustrating to me because I really think that we need to give due consideration to the other properties. And I was getting ready to ask the mayor, we've really got 3 pieces of property on the table right now, and how are we going to narrow this down?
With a motion and a vote.
Well, I'll make a motion to remove Florida Terrace from consideration.
Is there,
I'm not going to get a second, but
is there a second for that motion? It dies for lack of a second.
I forgot what I was going to say about Florida Terrace now.
for a pregnant sophomore, I went down swinging.
That's a gender change that's pretty amazing.
Wade brought it up. I didn't.
I forgot what I was going to say now.
He never did say whether he got zapped.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to talk a little bit because I think it refers to what you're saying, Commissioner Helms, and that has to do with compromise. Several times in public comments in our meetings, I've talked about compromise, and I've talked with friends, and I've written emails, and several people have written me back and say, I heard you say compromise. What is, can we work on a compromise? And I take it very seriously that we are aware of compromise and that we look toward a compromise. I thought that ever since June when Commissioner Helms first asked for other sites. And as I've walked around and looked around and poked around in the places that we're considering, I've continued to think about compromise. And I think I speak for the other commissioners too, that we've studied, that we've all prayed, that we've all talked and written and done a lot of things on our own because we each make our individual decisions. I'm sure you can tell that. We visited the sites. I walked several of them yesterday, just in the process, just partly because I've had all this just stirring in my mind, and I hadn't made a decision because I was working hard to keep an open mind. So where is the compromise? And one of the things I did last night, and I'm sure each of us did some reflecting since the meeting yesterday when we got the report from the ad hoc committee, was I looked at the spreadsheets. I went back and reread, and this would be my third time to reread the comment cards. We have them available to us electronically, and I also had gone down to the town office and looked at them in the hard copies. The reason for going back to the cards is that the ad hoc committee had no choice but to categorize people's comments. Some of the cards, people had even printed something on their printer in a very small font and fastened it to the card. So I commend those people from the ad hoc committee. There were people who wrote all around the side and they flipped it over and so forth, because we all have we care. There was a lot of impassioned comment on those cards. I decided, since the numbers had shown that there were a number of people who requested, using the card, requested that we consider the property outside the gate. And a number of those same people had written on their card, not on Florida Terrace. And that was instructed on this green sheet that was in people's mailbox. So there were a number of people who took that suggestion and wrote that on their card, which is fine. Everybody can fill out their card as they want. My question was, as I worked on this through the night last night, was did those people also suggest a compromise? So by looking at the cards and by taking the ruler and going down the spreadsheet, I was curious. And of all those cards, I found either 10 or 12, depending on how you looked at it, who mentioned any other site besides no to Florida Terrace and yes to outside the gate. And I'm feeling pretty discouraged about that, because if we really want to compromise, where is a real compromise? If we step out and decide we'll clear cut the property beside the post office, will that make people feel more engaged in this process and more a part of the discussion and feel like being a bigger and a more involved part of our community? I can't see that. I was really hoping that I could go, and I have all my little notes and I made little hash marks. Okay, good, here's one, and they suggested the place by the post office. Well, that would be okay, maybe a choice. But there was almost no mention of the ability to compromise. I know we've talked about compromise. I know I've talked about compromise, and others have too. I went back and reread the emails that had come within the last week or so since the architect's presentation, particularly since the meeting on the 18th, to see if some of the emails mentioned compromise, and it just wasn't there. So I think my concern is, what decision will actually, what will work? If we choose the place by the post office, would that work or not? I don't know. If we choose Pratt Park, would that work? I don't know, because I didn't see signs of people's willingness to work together.
I'm going to make a motion that we request of MRA their willingness to sell the property across from the post office, and at what price. Just trying to move it along.
Is there a second? Motion dies for lack of second.
Okay, that narrows it down, doesn't it? So it's down to Pratt Park, Florida.
I'll just go for it. Let's move this along. This is just like, I'm glad to, when I first retired, I worked for 30 years. I find the common conversation is, I just retired and I've been watching HGTV. Okay, that goes on for the first year. And the first thing we've learned, you've got 3 choices. Let's rule one out. Okay, I think we've ruled 2 out pretty effectively. That brings us, we've ruled out the post office site, and we've ruled out the above the gate site. Does anybody else have any suggestions of what else we should rule out at this point in time?
I'll just make a motion that we investigate building it on Pratt Park.
Is there a second?
I can't speak to the motion unless it's a second, right? I wanted to know if I could speak to the motion unless it has a second, but she said no, I can't.
We'd have to, I'll second it then so you can speak.
Okay. Okay, thanks. I just needed somebody to second so I could speak to it. And I actually made some notes related to this, because if, in order to have this motion, I would make an amendment to the motion, that the town of Montreat would be able to work out an agreement with the Mountain Retreat Association related to the use of that property for this facility within 30 days from today's date. And secondly, and this has to do with the date of the board meeting, by the way, that was coming up, that would have to be addressed anyway by the early November. And secondly, that town staff and the ADS, that's the architects, complete due diligence on the property in order to confirm its suitability for construction of our town hall. The reason for that is we do not have any soil studies, and that was what was mentioned. And that should these conditions not be met successfully, the town hall location will move to the Florida Terrace site currently owned by the town of Montreat.
I'll accept the first part of that amendment, but not the last line, not the last sentence about moving it to Florida.
We need to vote on the amendment. That goes before the vote on the site. We need to vote on the amendment before
So
we
do you need to
vote.
know what it is again? Because of course I stopped and chatted as I made it, so that left it to you to figure it out.
Do you have it written down?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do.
Except for the last line, Ron, I won't accept that as an amendment.
Well, I do want the last line in there.
Okay.
And we got our problem.
We have a motion and we also have an amendment. We need to vote on the amendment before we vote on the motion.